can't tell me what pizza toppings to enjoy, all right? So I like a little bit of sweetness with my savory. So the sweetness of the gummy bears combines with the savoriness of the cheese and the sauce, and you get a more complex flavor profile for the... What's that? Oh, we're recording. Well then, welcome everyone to my Theros Beyond Death set overview. We're only going to be doing the top 10 cards for Constructed here. Now, before we get too far here, I do want to give a big shout out to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video, as well as my stream over at twitch.tv/CalebDMTG. I stream Magic the Gathering Arena there. Come check it out. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Wizards. Much thanks. I don't know how many times I can say thanks, but thanks. All right, now into the set overview. Into the top 10. Number 1, HELIOD Sun Crowned. So in Standard, HELIOD combines well with cards like a Johnny's Pridemate and Lyndon the Steadfast Queen. I expect Mono White Devotion / Life Gain to be a solid archetype going forward. I haven't played with it myself at all yet, but I've lost to it enough to know that the hype isn't all air on this one. There's some real meat here, all right? So it's like almost self-rejuvenating an archetype in Standard. But in older formats, the card combines with a few different cards, most notably Walking Ballista for infinite damage. Just give the Ballista lifelink, make sure it's got at least 2 counters on it so that you remove a counter, it doesn't die to state-based effects, and then when it pings, the 1/1 counter is going to replace itself thanks to the HELIOD, and ping, infinite damage. Now the combo is a little slow, a little easy to interact with, but as with any two-card win, we know that Wizards is going to be watching it very carefully, especially in Pioneer, to make sure that it's not too dominant, right? Don't want to be too dominant. The deck dumps aren't in yet, but there have been a few different builds floating around in Pioneer and Modern, including a rumored 15-0 Modern list featuring Collected Company to find both HELIOD and Spike Feeder to gain infinite life. Not too shabby. Number 2, we got Nyx Lotus. Nyx Lotus has already impressed me in a big way, particularly in the mono blue devotion deck, but in green devotion lists as well. A lot of people underestimated the Lotus's ramp power, unfairly comparing it to Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. However, with that land, you always had to put at least 2 mana into it. So to actually start generating mana, you needed to have like 4+ devotion in play. Whereas the Lotus, the Nyx Lotus, doesn't have that activation cost. So it's just gravy. Just any amount of devotion whatsoever, and you're producing. If you only have a few pips of devotion in play, it operates a lot like a Gilded Lotus. It's about that level of power, right? Like 3 pips, tapping for 3 mana. And that's good, right, for a 4 mana ramp spell. It's not tapping the turn it comes into play, but it only costs 4 mana. Not too shabby. If you get a lot of devotion, and that's pretty easy to do, it is easier than I expected. If you get a lot of devotion, it starts going nuts. It starts going absolutely bonkers. And one of the reasons it's so easy to do is because we've got a few different ways to untap Nyx Lotus in Standard. Notably, Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner, and Corridor Monitor both do a really good job of both upping your devotion count, right? They both have colored pips in their mana cost. And then also untapping the Nyx Lotus. And you can play multiple of them in a turn and really just power off that way. So Nyx Lotus, when I did a set review for Tempo Storm, I rated the Lotus as playable, mostly in faith that it would be a solid enabler for devotion, but it's better. It's better than that. This card is great. Speaking of devotion, coming in at number 3, we have Thassa Deep Dwelling. Everyone likes to blink things, right? If all Thassa did was blink something for value once a turn, it would still appeal to a certain type of player. Personally, I have enjoyed playing the card in a few decks that have no chance of meeting the devotion requirement, just collecting my value from cards like Risen Reeve, Deputative Detention, and Wicked Wolf. Blink a card, get a value, do it again next turn, win the game that way at some point, right? It's dirtly, it's fun, it's sweet. And that's all well and good, but Thassa's at its absolute best in the blue devotion, intuitively, right? Where it can become a 6/5 indestructible, frighteningly easy. There, it still has the potential for blink value. There's a few of the blue creatures that draw cards or sift through the deck, but it can also beat down or serve as a mana sink for extra Nyx Lotus mana. It's hard for the opponent to block when all their stuff's tapped down. It's hard for them to attack when all their stuff's tapped down. You get the idea. Note that if you blink a Quarter Monitor on your end of turn, you can untap the Nyx Lotus that way. So if you have a instant speed ability to use, like say Thassa's, you're going to have a lot of mana to use it. Coming in at number 4, we have yet another blue devotion card, Thassa's Oracle. So all of these are kind of lumped together, right? It's hard to talk about Thassa Deep Dwelling and Nyx Lotus without also talking about Thassa's Oracle. So I'm going to talk about my mono blue deck list here in a second here. I'll give you folks a nice starting place for the deck. THASSA'S Oracle is a card where, when I first read it, I was like, oh, well, that's clearly playable in Devotion, but I guess we'll see how exactly good it is later when we get some games with it. Well, it is a little later, and holy bonkers, Batman. This card goes from filtering through a few cards to hit land drops in the early game, so it allows you to keep a lot of 2-land hands that wouldn't be keepable otherwise. And then in the late game, it looks through tremendous piles of cards to find whatever piece of the engine you're missing. Now, there is an alternate win condition on here. I think that's going to be a little bit easier to hit in Limited, where people start with smaller decks, right? You're starting with 40 cards instead of 60. It could come up more often there. Still going to be very difficult. In Constructed, it can happen, of course, because you are going to be drawing a lot of cards in this Blue Devotion deck. You can get there eventually, especially on the nutso turns where you're untapping Nyx Lotus over and over. But yeah, I digress. Mostly you're playing it for the filtering ability, the fact that it's a 2-mana 1/3, and you're getting those 2 pips of Devotion. It is a delight, an absolute delight to blink with Thassa Deep Dwelling, and it's already showing up in Pioneer Devotion lists. I imagine that because it's a merfolk, it's going to be good enough for Modern and possibly Legacy as well. I haven't tried it there. Maybe it's not good enough, but it's worth testing for sure. The only reason I rate the Oracle lower than Thassa herself is because Thassa should see play in more types of decks. I think Oracle will see play in more formats than Thassa will. So, Mono Blue Devotion, this is a deck that I have been very impressed with in my limited testing, but it's doing very powerful things, and it's doing it fairly consistently. Definitely a deck to look out for in this upcoming Standard season. So basically what you're doing is you're developing the board with Devotion, Thassa's Oracle, that's Fblthp, Witching Well, just cantripping, hitting land drops in the early game. You're not really an aggro deck. You're not really beating down. You're not like the old mono blue Devotion list, right? You're just setting up your building in Devotion. If you can get a Kiora down, that's great. If you can't, that's fine. If you're playing a Gadwick for no value, just as a 3-mana 3/3, that's totally fine. Just build your Devotion. Absolutely fine. There's a reason you're playing 4 of the card, right? Brazen Borrower. There's a reason you're playing 4 of the card. Bounce the thing, play it as a 3/1, get you 2 pips. Great. What you're trying to do in the early turn is set up for Nyx Lotus. So there's going to be turns where you play Nyx Lotus and then wait a turn to untap and use it. There's going to be turns where you have enough mana to untap it immediately. Either you already have a Kiora in play, or you have the 2 mana for Quarter Monitor, so you can go Lotus, Monitor, untap it, and get this giant burst of mana and really start popping off. And then once you're untapping the Nyx Lotus multiple times per turn, you can sink that mana into Gadwick, draw a bunch of cards. You can put it into Mass Manipulation, take the opponent's board. You can play Agent of Treachery and start blinking it with Thassa. There's a lot of different cool things you can do with that pile of extra mana. When it comes to the sideboard slots, I really like cards that have Devotion pips. When I'm playing this deck and I have a handful of reactive instants, I feel like it's wrong. It feels bad that I'm not developing the board, that I'm not tapping out, that I'm not building up my Devotion for Nyx Lotus. And so a lot of the sideboard is geared towards that. Towards cards that can interact with the opponent, but do it as permanents, right? Cards that, like Cerulean Drake or Mu Yanling, or things of that nature. Cards like Narset and Dungeon Geists. Anyway, you get the idea. In terms of card choices, there's still some moving around, right? There's still a few different cards that the final numbers on all of these cards have not settled, right? Like it's a new archetype. People are still trying stuff out. The things that I would not cut ever are any of the 4 of Thassa's Oracles, the 4 of Brazen Borrowers, Gadwick, and I really like Cavalier of Gales. I think it's close to a lock-in for 4 of as well. Card's just great, right? It's proven itself already, and it gives you a lot of Devotion, a lot of value. It's a 5/5 flyer. Gives you value on death. Yeah, card's just amazing. And then I think you want at least 3 Thassa Deep Dwelling. Card's amazing, really good to turn on. It's good on offense and defense. Plays well with the Thassa's Oracle. And you need at least 3 Nyx Lotus. The deck is really built around Nyx Lotus and untapping it. That said, with Thassa's Oracle, Witching Well, and Fblthp cantrips and whatnot, I haven't had trouble finding a single copy of Nyx Lotus when I want it, by the time that I want to play it, and multiple copies are dead. So I've been playing 3 so far instead of 4. It is really important to the deck. I can understand wanting to play 4 Nyx Lotus. It might be correct. I think the more removal people are playing for Nyx Lotus, the less you're actually able to untap with it when you run it out on turn 4, the more you want to play 4 copies instead of 3. Because then you're just playing your first Nyx Lotus out, and it's just like trading with your opponent's Brontodon or what have you, and then your second Nyx Lotus is what's letting you pop off. So the more artifact disruption that's in the format, the more you want 4 copies. Right now I haven't seen a ton of that, so I've been happy with 3. That's where I'm at right now. One notable card that I have not been playing, that a lot of people have been playing and been really happy with, is Arcanist Owl. My issue with this card is that it's not always a hit. So you gotta do the math and figure out, okay, how often is this card a 4-mana 3/3 flyer? And how terrible is that in comparison to Cavalier of Gales, right? Which is just a 5-mana 5/5 flyer, comes in always drawing you a card when it comes into play, and then you're getting death value as well. Like, one of these cards is priced for constructed play, right? And the other one's not really. I think the more consistent you can make the Arcanist Owl trigger, the more that I like it. I am playing Witching Well and Quarter Monitor here, but even if you're whiffing like 10% of the time, that's too much for me. I don't ever want to just play a 4-mana 3/3. Another issue with the Owl that I think people are underestimating is that it is a 4-drop, so it's competing with Nyx Lotus and it's competing with THASSA on turn 4. It's going to be pretty rare that that's actually what I want to be doing with my mana at that stage of the game. But that said, some people like it, so if you like it and it's winning for you, then trust your testing. Trust your own testing over what anybody else tells you. But this is the list that I'm at. I'm happy with right now. Should be a good starting spot if that's what you're looking for. All right. Setting aside devotion for a second, we are going to look at number 5, which is Citizen Champion. So Citizen Champion, when I first looked at the spoiler, I said, oh, well, this is playable. But I underestimated the amount of enchantments that are in the format. Intuitively, you would play this card with a bunch of pump auras and start beating down. The ability grows it, right? So like it looks like it wants to be aggressive. But between all of the sagas, omens, and enchantment-based removal in the format, you could play the champion in all kinds of different value shells. Yeah, the body is nice for attacking, but it's nice for blocking too, and everybody wants to draw cards. Eidolon of Blossoms did a ton of work when it was in Standard, and Citizen Champion matches up pretty okay against it stat-wise. It's not an enchantment itself, so it's not guaranteed value. It's not, right? Eidolon of Blossoms would draw a card off of itself when it came into play, and that's going to make it a little worse at grinding, and thus worse versus control. But that said, it's also a full colored mana cheaper, making it much more efficient, so much more explosive. You can start drawing your cards sooner. And it's also to play in 3-color decks, so it's going to find more homes because of that. And Eidolon of Blossom saw a ton of play last time around, so an easier to cast version, yeah, deal, I'm in. Enchantress effects are either like wildly unplayable or incredibly good, depending on the format that they're printed in, and this one is printed in a format with a lot of enchantments, so look out for Citizen Champion. All right, coming in at number 6, Dream Trawler. And this is probably low for this card, right? So I clumped a lot of devotion cards all together so I could talk about them together. And because it's weird to have one rated over the other, because without one, the other one's like not as good, you know? But Dream Trawler is probably rated low here at number 6. It should probably be higher. I've seen it show up in more mid-rangey shells and more controlling shells. And honestly, the card's just nuts. It's very hard to beat. Back in the day, people used to joke about how Baneslayer Angel just dies to Doomblade. Well, this one doesn't. it doesn't die to Doomblade. They have the removal spell, and you're like, all right, whatever, discard a card, untap, attack, gain life, what have you. When you untap, you're going to be able to protect it with counter magic too, so if they try and like kill it to prevent you from attacking, you can counter, get your serve in, draw your cards. If you play a draw spell on the same turn that you're attacking with the Dream Trawler, that's going to pump it as well, so you're going to be getting even more life. Oh my god. I've heard it joked that Wizards printed Dream Trawler so the control mages would accidentally end the game at some point. like want to draw cards? Well, you'd better start attacking, buddy. Like, this card is sick. I did compare it to Baneslayer Angel earlier. It's worth noting that it's harder to cast than Baneslayer Angel, so it's going to see play in fewer archetypes, right? You're not playing this in your mono white sideboard. You got the blue and the white there. So it's a little harder to cast, but it's much more powerful because of that. Much harder to deal with. And it costs 6, right? 6 mana is a little bit different than 5. Gonna see a lot of play. All right, coming in at number 7, we have an uncommon and a reprint at that. Grey Merchant of Asphodel. So we remember this one from back in the day, right? Well, this time we don't have Thoughtseize. We don't have Thoughtseize here to clear the way and disrupt the opponent. We don't have Pack Rat, right? So we don't have a few of the cards that made the Grey Merchant shell quite so busted last time around. But we have a few new tools. One of which we'll be getting to in a second. Another one I want to mention is Bolas's Citadel. So Bolas' Citadel and Grey Merchant, quite nasty together. But so is Command the Dreadhorde. So the way that I've been playing Grey Merchant so far has been alongside the Cat Oven combo, and then playing it alongside cards like Yorick's Fenlurker, Tymaret, the new Tymaret card, and Ayara, and Nightmare Shepherd, which we're going to get to in a second here. Nightmare Shepherd, very exciting little devotion card. But yeah, I think Grey Merchant's going to see a lot of play, and I just wish that Fnatic Amogus had also seen a reprint, so Red would have gotten a direct damage tool as well. But this is sweet. I love it. Great reprint, Wizards. Number 8, I just mentioned it, Nightmare Shepherd. This card has really impressed me. So the base stats is 4 mana for a 4/4 flyer. Totally fine if it comes with an ability, which this one does. And like I said, I've been abusing it with comes into play effects like Grey Merchant. And then you also have free sack outlets like Witch's Oven or the new Woe Strider. So even if the opponent is going to kill your thing, even if it's going to kill your Nightmare Shepherd, in response, you can sacrifice a creature that's already gotten value and get another trigger. Getting extra trigger with a card like Yorick's Fenlurker is sweet. You can even exile a card in the opponent's hand during their draw step. So if the opponent's Hellbent and your board state is, say, Witch's Oven, Yorick's Fenlurker, Nightmare Shepherd, if you have these 3 cards, if you sacrifice the Fenlurker during the opponent's draw step, it'll come back into play with the Nightmare Shepherd ability, and then you can exile the card out of their hand, and they just don't get the card. Assuming it's not an instant that they can respond to the ability with, they're just not getting their card for the turn, which is great. There's a reason that discard spells tend to be sorcery speed. But yeah, that's great. All kinds of value is great, but getting another Grey Merchant of Asphodel trigger is game-ending. Note that when you sacrifice a card and it comes back with Yorick's Fenlurker, even though it's a 1/1, it still has the same number of pips in the casting cost, so it is still good with devotion. Number 9, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. So when I first looked at the set, this is the card that looked like it was clearly priced for Constructed. It's this mythic that just like explodes in your face, like, look at all the value, and just grabs you and shakes you, you know? And it's good. It's not quite as good as I thought it was. I've seen a lot of people try and slot this into any old blue-green deck, which I think is a mistake. Not every blue-green deck wanted Growth Spiral, for example. And when you're casting Uro the first time, it's a lot like a Growth Spiral, right? You're getting 3 life, but you're also spending another mana. That said, any deck that wants Growth Spiral, most of them probably already also want this card. Maybe not as a 4-of. It is more expensive, like I mentioned, but it is a similar effect. It's not fitting the same spot on the curve, but gaining a bit of life, coming back later, that all makes up for a lot. Just note that it's not the most efficient ramp spell because it costs 3 and it needs graveyard value to come back. Most decks playing Uro are designed to abuse the escape mechanic with cards like Tamiyo, Collector of Tales, and the green Cavalier to both find the escape creatures and fill up the graveyard to actually pay for said mechanic, right? Another Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath synergy that I've seen is Lazav the Multifarious. So that's a way to abuse Uro. You get the 6/6 value attacker out of nowhere, and you don't actually have to have enough great cards in the graveyard to escape. You can start beating down quickly. Note that you can copy Uro with Lazav and then also bring it back and have 2 6/6s, since the legends will have different names. If I had done the set review before playing with any of these cards, Uro would be much higher. There's a chance that it starts seeing a lot of play and it becomes higher than this. There's also a chance that it doesn't see much play and it ends up lowering out of my top 10 list. A little bit of room for movement with that card. Number 10 is a card that I have not actually seen play at all yet, but I think it's really costed to see play, and I'm still including it in my top 10 because of that. This is one that everyone's not excited to brew around. It's not really a build-around card, but I think it's just a solid card in general, and that is KUNOROS, Hound of Aetherios. Look at that good boy. Like I said, I haven't seen this card in play yet, but I think it's only a matter of time. In older formats, it hates on Dredge and Reanimator, and in Standard, it acts as a hoser for the cat combo. All of this with a slew of abilities to boot. You got a 3/3 with Vigilance, Menace, and Lifelink, and that's going to be hard for an aggro deck to beat, right? At 3 mana, it's not the most efficient graveyard hoser, but it doesn't need to be efficient if it's good in multiple matchups. In this case, the Lifelink makes it a must-kill versus red aggro decks. and it's still fine if the hate is incidental because you're main decking in, kind of similar to Scavenging Ooze. All told, you have a slew of relevant abilities tied to a reasonable body, and I expect KUNOROS to see a ton of play in both standard and eternal formats. Well, maybe not a ton of play, but it deserves a ton of play. How about that? And if it doesn't, it'll be more due to the gold casting cost restricting the number of decks that it can be played in. Finally, I'm going to talk about some cards that didn't make the top 10 list, but that I considered for it. So these are the honorable mentions. The first Hero in Games, I think, has a lot of value built into it. I think it's going to see a lot of play. Phoenix of Ash, just a good card. It only fits into mono red list, though, so it's like not gonna make the cut here. Elspeth Conquers Death. I think is a card that a lot of spikes are sleeping on. Card is sweet. Eat to Extinction is a card that's just going to see a lot of play overall. It's not splashy, it's not super impressive, but it's a card that can actually answer the gods, which is really, really cool. And you get a little bit of value off it as well. And then finally, Klothys, God of Destiny, is a card that I don't think will necessarily show up in Standard very often, but I think might do like a kind of a Sulfuric Vortex type effect in Modern and Pioneer. So potentially a very, very good card there. All right, that's going to do it. This was my top 10. Thanks for hanging out, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to close with a mono black devotion list that we're going to go over here really quick. Not a lot to explain. It's pretty intuitive, but yeah, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you for watching. Much love. CalebD out.